Did you know? If you own $1 million property in Toronto, you could be paying $30,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing. That's right. As of 2025, Toronto's vacancy tax has tripled, and it's turning the city's real estate scene upside down. Some are calling it a necessary move to free up housing. Others, they say it's a direct hit on investors like you. So here's the question. Is Toronto still worth your money? Or is it time to take your capital elsewhere? I just got off a call with a real estate lawyer in Toronto. He said, and I quote, "Most of my investor clients are rethinking their entire strategy this year." In this video, we're breaking down the numbers, the risks, and the hidden opportunities, so you can make smarter moves and avoid costly mistakes. Take a look at this. Toronto Vacancy Tax Increase, 2022 versus 2025. Let's dive in. Part 1. What's happening in Toronto's market right now? Let's start with where things stand as of early 2025. Toronto has long been a darling of international investors. Strong immigration, solid economic growth, and a consistent demand for housing have made it one of the most resilient real estate markets in North America. But here's the shift. New regulations, higher borrowing costs, and now, an aggressive vacancy tax. The city's vacant home tax, or VHT, was first introduced in 2022 at 1%. Back then, most investors didn't bat an eye. It was more of an administrative hassle than a financial pain. But in 2025, it's a whole different game. The rate has now tripled to 3% of your property's assessed value. If you own a $1.5 million condo downtown and it sits empty for more than 6 months, you're staring at a $45,000 annual tax bill. Take a look at this comparison. Toronto Vacancy Tax Increase, 2022 versus 2025. And that's on top of rising mortgage rates, which are hovering around 6% right now. Canada 5-year fixed mortgage rates, 2020 versus 2025. I was speaking last week with Daniel Lee, a Toronto-based real estate advisor who works with high-net-worth clients from London and New York. His take? These changes aren't just a policy shift, they're a wake-up call. Investors who've been passive are going to feel the squeeze. You either adapt or you exit. And here's the kicker. The city is ramping up enforcement. If you fail to file your property status by April 30th, 2025, you're automatically taxed. Audits are up, with over 466 properties flagged just this year alone. And last year's chaos, where 160,000 owners got billed by mistake, proves the system isn't perfect. The message from City Hall is clear. Rent it, sell it, or pay up. Part 2. Why Toronto is still a magnet, but only for the right kind of investor. So why are some investors still bullish on Toronto? Let's zoom out. Despite these new rules, Toronto remains one of the top cities for rental demand. Immigration has been a driving force, with over 500,000 newcomers expected in Canada this year alone. And most of them are landing in urban centers like Toronto. Vacancy rates are at historic lows, 1.2% in early 2025. And rents? They've climbed to an average of $3,500 a month for a 2-bedroom downtown condo. Check this out. Toronto rental vacancy rates, 2019 versus 2025. Now compare that to New York City. Rents in Manhattan have also surged, hitting an average of $4,200 a month. But the entry price point is steeper, and there's no vacancy tax. Yet. Still, some investors complain about aggressive rent controls and tenant protections, making it harder to maximize returns. And over in London, while you don't have a vacancy tax, you're navigating a maze of property surcharges for foreign buyers and steep stamp duties. I was chatting with Emma Patel, an investor from Sydney who recently picked up a triplex in Toronto's East End. She told me, "Yeah, the vacancy tax stings, but we ran the numbers, and with the rental demand here, the yields are still solid. Plus, Toronto's long-term capital appreciation is hard to beat. It's not like Sydney, where prices have plateaued lately." The point? If you're active, strategic, and renting out your properties, Toronto still works. Part 3. The pitfalls investors need to watch for in 2025. But, and this is a big but, it's not the same game it was 5 years ago. Here's what's changed. The 3% VHT hits hard. Leaving a property vacant while you wait for prices to rise is no longer a viable strategy unless you're okay bleeding cash. Mortgage rates are no longer dirt cheap. At 6%, carrying costs are significant. Legal complexities have increased. Lawyers are now requiring proof of VHT compliance in all closing transactions, which can delay deals by weeks. And audits? They're not just a slap on the wrist anymore. Daniel Lee mentioned a client who faced a $30,000 audit adjustment plus back taxes because they missed one deadline. It's not just about the money, he said. It's the stress and the hassle. Investors need to be hands-on or hire someone who is. Let's look at some numbers. Toronto condo mortgage costs versus rental income, 2023 versus 2025. The margin for error is thin. You need a solid strategy to make this work. Part 4. Strategies that are actually working for investors right now. So what are savvy investors doing? Rent it out immediately. No more waiting. Investors are listing units as soon as they close. Some are even offering move-in incentives to lock in tenants faster. For example, in Miami, it's common to offer 1 month's free rent to attract tenants quickly. Now we're seeing similar tactics in Toronto's competitive rental market. Claim exemptions where you can. Renovating? Dealing with estate issues? These scenarios can exempt you from the VHT. But, and this is key, you need airtight documentation. Emma Patel's legal team filed for a renovation exemption on her triplex, saving her $15,000. But she was quick to point out, it's not a rubber stamp. You need the paperwork ready before they come asking. Flip fast, flip smart. The 6-month vacancy threshold means flippers need to work on tighter timelines. In 2024, a client of Daniel's bought a semi-detached in Riverdale, gutted it, and sold it in under 5 months, netting a $120,000 profit without triggering the tax. Speed is your competitive edge now, Daniel said. Explore regional alternatives. Some investors are shifting focus to other Canadian cities. Calgary, for instance, has no vacancy tax and median home prices at $550,000. Plus, annual price growth has been steady at 6%. Take a look at this. Calgary versus Toronto, median home prices and vacancy tax 2025. But keep in mind, the rental demand isn't quite the same, and appreciation rates may differ over time. Part 5. Comparing Toronto to global markets. How does Toronto stack up globally in 2025? New York City. No vacancy tax, but rent controls are tough. Median condo prices hover around $1.2 million, and transaction costs are high. London. No VHT, but overseas buyers face a 2% surcharge and stamp duties add up. Median prices in prime areas are around £1 million. Sydney. No vacancy tax yet, but rumors are swirling. Prices have flattened after years of strong growth, with median home prices around 1.1 million Australian dollars. Toronto's 3% vacancy tax might feel steep, but compared to these cities, it's not game over, just a different rulebook. Daniel summed it up well. Toronto's become an active investor's market. You can't set it and forget it anymore, but if you're engaged, the returns are still there. Take a look at this final comparison, Toronto versus NYC versus London versus Sydney, Investor ROI Potential 2025. So let's take a breath and recap the key takeaways, because if you're watching this far, you're serious about making smart moves in 2025. First, Toronto isn't off limits for investors, but the old playbook doesn't work anymore. You can't just buy a property, sit on it, and hope for appreciation while you're sipping coffee in Miami or Bondi Beach. You've got to be active, rent it, flip it, or find ways to work within the rules. Second, the 3% vacancy tax is a game changer. It's not a minor fee, it's a serious cost that can wipe out your margins if you're not paying attention. But if you're strategic, like claiming exemptions or speeding up your Reno projects, there's still plenty of opportunity on the table. And third, while other markets like New York, London, and Sydney might seem more stable, they come with their own headaches. Toronto's fundamentals, population growth, rental demand, and long-term price appreciation are still strong. Take a look at this quick comparison. Global investor pain points, Toronto versus NYC versus London versus Sydney. Now, if I were sitting across from you at a coffee shop in downtown Toronto, here's what I'd say. You can either complain about the new rules, or you can adapt and stay ahead of the game. The choice is yours. I've got clients, some from San Francisco, others from Manchester, who've doubled down on Toronto this year. Why? Because they understand that volatility creates opportunity. But here's the thing. Those who wait too long to act often miss the window. And in a market like this, timing is everything. So what's your next move? Are you adjusting your strategy to stay profitable in Toronto? Or are you eyeing markets like Calgary or even Miami instead? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this breakdown valuable, here's your next step. Hit that like button so we know to make more content like this. Subscribe to EstateScope and turn on notifications. Because in the next video, we're diving into the top 5 emerging cities that international investors are quietly moving into. You don't want to miss that, especially if you're looking for your next big opportunity. Trust me, by the time the mainstream headlines catch up, the best deals are already gone. So hit subscribe and I'll see you there.